What would you do if you discovered that everything you believed about Jesus was incomplete, even wrong? There is a strange gap in the Bible. The entire 18 years from when Jesus was 12 to 30 are missing. Not a single line about the formative years that shaped him. But what's even stranger, those lost chapters may actually exist preserved for thousands of years in an ancient Bible deep in the mountains of Ethiopia. Who deliberately removed these stories from the Bible? And why haven't you heard about them? We grow up with the familiar story: Jesus is born in Bethlehem, visited by wise men, then flees to Egypt. Then he appears at age 12 in the temple in Jerusalem, stunning his teachers with his extraordinary wisdom. But then, the story stops abruptly. The story then comes to an abrupt and complete halt. When the next time we encounter Jesus in the biblical narrative, he is approximately 30 years old, and John the Baptist is the one who is baptizing him. That is a gap of 18 years, which is similar to his entire infancy in young adult life, and it is utterly absent from the pages of the Bible. Just give that some thought for a second. During those years which events took place, where exactly did Jesus go, and what did he discover? Who did he come into contact with? Despite the fact that these are the years that shape a person's life, the key figure of Christianity is utterly devoid of any formative experiences during this time. A great number of academics have hypotheses. Some people believe that Jesus went to India, while others believe that he studied with the Essenes, who is a small Jewish group. Imagine, however, that the answers had been written down from the beginning and that they had been kept in one of the oldest Christian traditions in the world. The information that I am about to share with you is not a recent finding made by archaeologists. Over the course of several centuries, it has been concealed in plain sight in the mountains of Ethiopia, which is one of the oldest Christian nations in the world. When compared to the majority of Protestant Bibles, which include 66 books, or the Catholic editions of the Bible, which contains 73 books. The Ethiopian Bible, also known as the Gaia's Bible, contains 81 volumes. In total, there are 15 more books of the Bible that the majority of Christians have never encountered. It is not enough to just have a greater number of books. The Ethiopian Bible is remarkable because it contains texts that describe the life of Jesus during those years that are absent. These texts were purposefully left out of the Western biblical canons, which is what makes the Ethiopian Bible so remarkable. In addition, there is something else that is amazing about the link that Ethiopia has to the history of the Bible. It was not European missionaries who were responsible for introducing Christianity to it. According to Ethiopian tradition, Christianity arrived in Ethiopia in the 1st century through the Ethiopian eunuch, which is recorded in Acts 8:26-40. This would make Ethiopia potentially one of the earliest Christian nations outside of the Middle East. However, Ethiopia also has a unique distinction. The only African nation that was able to effectively fight European colonization and keep its independence while other countries gradually fell under the control of foreign powers is this one. Ethiopia was able to maintain its religious traditions on account of its historical independence, which prevented it from being subject to the same amount of external influence as was experienced by other regions. When you take a look at this ancient Ethiopian Bible, which is bound in leather, that is hundreds of years old, has pages made from animal skin, and is written in Ge'ez, an ancient liturgical language, you are looking at what is possibly the most authentic rendition of early Christian literature that is still in existence today. At this point, you might be questioning how valid the biblical tradition that is practiced in Ethiopia is. Is this just an out-of-the-way offshoot that contains texts that are questionable? The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is one of the oldest organized Christian entities in the world. It was founded in the 4th century, making it one of the first Christian institutions in the world. Furthermore, in the year 330 AD, when the majority of people in Europe were still practicing pagan religions, Ethiopia had already declared Christianity to be the official state religion. There is an even deeper relationship between Ethiopian history and biblical history. In the 10th chapter of 1 Kings, we learn that King Solomon had a visit from the Queen of Sheba. On the other hand, the events that took place after that visit are not mentioned in our Western Bibles. According to Ethiopian tradition, which is recounted in their ancient literature known as the Keber Nagast, also known as the Glory of Kings, the Queen of Sheba, and King Solomon had a son together named Menelik Phi, who went on to become the first emperor of Ethiopia. This is beyond the realm of religious folklore. In 2012, genetic experts from the University of Cambridge investigated the DNA of a large number of Ethiopians and discovered evidence that suggests there was significant genetic mixing between native Ethiopians and populations from the Middle East approximately 3,000 years ago. This is the exact time period during which Solomon would have governed. Until Emperor Haile Selassie, who ruled until 1974, the Ethiopian royal dynasty claimed direct genealogy from this union of Solomon and Sheba. This made the Ethiopian monarchy the longest-running monarchy in history with connections to biblical figures. Ethiopian Christians believe that they are in possession of the original Ark of the Covenant, which is the holy chest that contains the Ten Commandments. This is an even more remarkable belief. According to their story, Menelik the Wee is said to have returned to Ethiopia with the Ark after paying a visit to his father Solomon in Jerusalem. They assert that the Ark is still housed in a unique sanctuary in the city of Axum, where it is guarded by a solitary monk who never leaves the area. It is necessary to have an understanding of the origins of the Bible in its current form in order to comprehend the reasons behind the inclusion or exclusion of particular books from our contemporary Bible. Beginning in the early decades following the death of Jesus, there were a great number of texts that circulated concerning his life and teachings. Some of them were tales recorded by his disciples, others were written by eyewitnesses, and many of them were later compositions that combined fact and legend. At the Council of Nicaea, which was called by Emperor Constantine in the year 325 AD, the first significant attempt was made to define which writings were deemed to be authorized sources of information. However, contrary to what most people believe, this council did not actually complete the process of establishing the biblical canon. The process of determining which text would be recognized to be part of the Bible was initiated as a result of this. This effort was continued by subsequent councils and church fathers, with Athanasius of Alexandria being the first person to list the 27 books of the New Testament in the form that we are familiar with today in the year 367 AD. Around the year 400 AD, St. Jerome translated the Bible from Hebrew and Greek into Latin, therefore creating what is now known as the Vulgate. This translation was his work. But here is what is absolutely necessary to comprehend. It was males who made these selections about which works should be included, and they frequently had political and theological agendas behind their choices. Books that were deemed to be heretical or apocryphal and did not conform to the ideology of the growing Orthodox theology were eliminated from consideration. The King James Version, which was commissioned in 1604 and finished in 1611, further confirmed which passages the majority of Christians who speak English would believe to be canonical. King James I of England gave his approval to this translation, not just for religious reasons, but also for the purpose of bringing his nation under the authority of a single religious book that supported the authority of both the monarchy and the Church of England jointly. They were talented, but they were also bound by precise orders from the king, which included guidelines that reinforced church hierarchy and royal authority. The 47 academics who worked on this translation were clever, but they were also bound by these restrictions. They worked with texts that had already been passed through a selection process that had been occurring for millennia. In the meantime, Christians in Ethiopia, who were geographically and politically disconnected from the rest of the world, kept a separate collection of literature retaining volumes that were either rejected or lost in the West. So what exactly do these Ethiopian manuscripts have to say regarding the years that Jesus did not return to earth? Stories that have been preserved in publications such as the Ethiopian Book of the Contending of Christ and the Miracles of Jesus create a fascinating picture of Jesus when he was a child and when he was developing into a young man. The tales that have been provided indicate that the young Jesus was not only smart above his years, but that he was already performing miracles from the time he was a toddler. Jesus is said to have been playing with other children and creating birds out of clay, according to a well-known narrative. As soon as the Sabbath came to an end, he gave the command for the clay birds to come to life, and they flew away, which amazed everyone who saw it. Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, was working on a wooden bed for a wealthy man when he accidentally cut one of the planks too short. This is described in another account. Joseph was reassured by the little Jesus that he should not be concerned. He took hold of the board, extended it to the appropriate length, and therefore spared his father the humiliation that would have otherwise been his. Jesus is also described in these writings as having the ability to heal children who had been harmed to bring animals that had died back to life, and to demonstrate an incredible grasp of all scripture and spiritual issues, which left the elders and teachers scratching their heads. There are accounts of Jesus acquiring knowledge from the most eminent professors in a variety of Jewish traditions, thereby becoming an expert not only in the Torah, but also in more profound mystical understanding. The Essenes are a Jewish group that is known for its ascetic lifestyle and their emphasis on spiritual purity. According to some sources, he spent some time with the Essenes. Jesus is portrayed in these scriptures as someone who, even when he was a kid, was aware of his divine nature and purpose. At the same time, however, he was also being taught to regulate and comprehend his powers within the context of human experience. The fact that many of these same stories appear in other ancient texts that are not part of the Ethiopian tradition, such as the Infancy Gospel of Thomas and the Arabic Infancy Gospel, is particularly intriguing. This suggests that these stories originate from a common early tradition about Jesus that was widespread before it was excluded from the Western canon. The stories contained in these Ethiopian writings do not always depict Jesus in the manner that we might anticipate. In other versions, Jesus is depicted as a young man who was still in the process of learning how to handle his divine gifts, which occasionally led to problematic outcomes. A story that has caused a lot of controversy describes a time when another youngster ran across Jesus, which caused him to become upset. Immediately after Jesus said, "You shall not finish your journey," the young boy collapsed to the ground and died. Jesus authorized Joseph to take the youngster by the ear as a kind of discipline when the local people complained to him. However, Jesus ultimately brought the boy back to life, demonstrating both his human feelings and his supernatural authority. There is another narrative that portrays Jesus transforming children into goats after they hid from him during a game. However, when the children's parents begged him to change them back, Jesus made the transformation. In these stories, Jesus is depicted as a young man who was still working to reconcile his human feelings with his divine essence. As evidence that these texts are later fabrications, critics refer to these more disturbing accounts as evidence. They argue that these texts are inconsistent with the character of Jesus as it is depicted in the canonical Gospels. They demonstrate Jesus' genuine human development as he learned to use his powers in a responsible manner as he developed according to those who defend them. The fact that not all of these books are regarded as equally authoritative is something that should be taken into consideration, even within the context of Ethiopian tradition. Despite the fact that they are preserved as a part of the larger tradition, Ethiopian scholars themselves differentiate between the various types of religious literature. The sacred writings of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church are arranged into various levels of authority according to the Church's practice. The 81 books that are believed to be canonical are the most authoritative. There are others that are revered for their instructional value, but they are not always considered to be divinely inspired text in the same category. This nuanced approach to sacred literature is actually more similar to how early Christians saw religious books before the rigid canonization procedure that occurred in later years. From the perspective of the Bible, early Christians did not have a binary in the Bible. Rather, they had a spectrum of texts that varied in terms of their amount of authority and usefulness. What is the reason for the absence of these tales of Jesus' childhood and youth in the Bible that the majority of us are familiar with today? There are a number of convincing reasons for this. To begin, a great number of the early church fathers were troubled by scriptures that appeared to place an abundance of emphasis on Jesus' divinity at the expense of his humanity. In the 4th and 5th centuries, a doctrine came into being that highlighted the fact that Jesus was not only a divine creature appearing to be human, but rather that he was totally human and completely divine. When Jesus was a toddler, there were stories that he performed extraordinary miracles. These stories seemed to invalidate his true human experience. Furthermore, a number of these accounts were in direct opposition to the Gospel of John, which asserts that the miracle that Jesus performed at the wedding in Cana was his very first miracle. In the event that Jesus had been doing miracles ever since he was a toddler, this assertion would be incorrect. Thirdly, the nascent church was engaged in a struggle against a number of heretical movements, most notably Gnosticism, which placed an emphasis on secret knowledge and spiritual insights. There were texts that seemed to substantiate these Gnostic notions. These texts stated that Jesus had particular hidden teachings or experiences that were not widely recognized around the world. In the fourth place, there were questions over the practical aspects of which texts could be proved to be legitimate. Writings that could not be definitively traced back to apostles or their direct disciples were regarded with skepticism, particularly if they appeared decades or centuries after the events that they claimed to recount. In conclusion, there were political factors to take into account. When Christianity was recognized as the official religion of the Roman Empire, it became essential to maintain political unity by ensuring that all people adhered to the same set of beliefs. Texts that could potentially provoke a variety of interpretations or which could pose a challenge to the authority of the church were potentially unstable. This process of picking which works to include in the canon was not a single instance of a conspiracy or cover-up, which is something that should be brought to your attention. It evolved gradually over the course of several centuries, with various regional churches possessing a variety of text collections, eventually leading to the gradual process of standardization. Ethiopia was able to keep a more diverse collection of texts as a result of its geographical isolation from these political influences. This allowed Ethiopia to preserve voices and traditions that had been lost elsewhere. In the most recent decades, there has been a surge in interest in these forgotten books of Christianity, not only among academics, but also among ordinary people who are looking for a more comprehensive understanding of the history of their faith. Scholars were forced to reevaluate the diversity of early Christianity as a result of the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1945 and the Dead Sea Scrolls between 1947 and 1956. Both of these discoveries showed a large number of early Christian and Jewish manuscripts that were not included in the Bible that were discovered. Western readers now have easier access to Ethiopian texts, thanks to the modern translations that have been done. These ancient tales have been brought to the attention of new audiences through the publication of books such as the Ethiopian Book of Life and scholarly studies that analyze these traditions. Even mainstream churches have been increasingly receptive to the study of these texts, not necessarily as scripture, but rather as vital windows into the thought and behavior of early Christians. It is currently common practice for many seminaries to provide courses on non-canonical texts in addition to standard biblical studies. There has been an increase in the level of engagement between the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the wider Christian congregation. Through the use of digital media, intellectual exchanges, and interfaith dialogues, Ethiopian Christians are now having the opportunity to communicate their traditions with audiences all over the world after having been relatively isolated for centuries. The fact that the Ethiopian tradition was not found after it had been lost is one of the most valued aspects of it. This is a practice that has been passed down from generation to generation, dating back to the earliest decades of Christianity. These documents and customs have been consistently preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which provides a living link to ancient rituals that may be studied by academics. The tradition of writing in manuscripts is remarkable in and of itself. Some of the world's earliest illuminated Christian manuscripts may be found in Ethiopia. These manuscripts feature distinctive artistic styles and symbolic systems that have been evolved over the course of centuries. The Gospels of Garima, which are kept in the Abba Garima Monastery in Ethiopia, have been carbon dated to between 330 and 650 AD. This places them among the oldest complete Christian manuscripts that have ever been discovered anywhere in the world. The question now is, what do these Ethiopian texts and traditions finally teach us about Jesus, and do they alter the way that we ought to perceive him? The portrayal of Jesus as someone who matured and evolved over the course of his life is completed by these texts. Jesus had a childhood and young adulthood in which he was both learning and teaching while he was growing up. Moreover, they shed light on how early Christians understood the one-of-a-kind characteristics of Jesus, rendering him more approachable. For those who are concerned about theological implications, it is essential to point out that these verses do not contradict fundamental Christian concepts about the divinity of Jesus, his death, and his resurrection. The canonical Gospels leave out certain aspects of his life, but these Gospels fill in the blanks with color and detail. Perhaps the most powerful thing these ancient texts offer is a reminder Christianity never had just one origin, one voice, or one path. We often think of Christianity as a religion that began in the Middle East, blossomed in Europe, and was later brought to Africa and Asia. But history tells a different story, one of multiple beginnings. From its earliest days, Christianity was growing in many places at once, each with its own customs, languages, and sacred perspectives. Ethiopia is one of those places. Alongside the Egyptian Coptic Church, the Syrian Orthodox Church, and the Church of the East in what is now Iraq and Iran. Ethiopian Christianity evolved independently, untouched by Roman or Greek influence. These were not offshoots, they were original branches rooted in the same soil of early Christian belief, but shaped by different cultures and experiences. There was never just one version of early Christianity. From the very beginning, there were many interpretations of who Jesus was, what he taught, and how his message should be lived. And that's what makes these Ethiopian texts so important today. You don't have to abandon familiar scriptures to learn from them. Instead, they add depth, offering new ways to reflect, new questions to ask, and new dimensions to faith and understanding. Whether you see these manuscripts as sacred scripture, priceless history, or cultural treasures, one thing is certain: they expand our view of early Christianity. They show us how real communities held on to their beliefs, passed down their stories, and preserved their truth, often against incredible odds. The story of the Ethiopian Bible isn't just a historical footnote. It's a powerful reminder that even through centuries of invasion, censorship, and forgetting, wisdom can survive and still speak. The ancient Christian culture in Ethiopia was able to endure invasions, including a severe campaign in the 1500s, spearheaded by Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, which resulted in the destruction of a large number of churches and manuscripts. The country managed to preserve its unique spiritual tradition despite being subjected to modernizing pressures, political upheavals, and periods of isolation. In the year 1938, a fire caused damage to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, which was the location of a large number of old manuscripts. And yet, through it all, the most sacred books of Ethiopia survived. During the Italian occupation in the 1930s, and again under the communist Derg regime, from 1974 to 1991, Ethiopian Christians went to extraordinary lengths to protect their holy texts. They hid them in remote caves, sealed them in buried containers, and risked everything to ensure these writings wouldn't be lost to foreign rule or political oppression. This determination teaches us a powerful truth: knowledge that truly matters will endure often in the most unlikely places. For centuries, this ancient African Christian tradition has guarded its spiritual heritage in silence, patiently waiting for the world to be ready to listen. While empires rose and fell, Ethiopia preserved a voice from the earliest days of Christianity, untouched, unwavering. As we reach the end of this journey through the Ethiopian Bible and the forgotten years of Jesus' life, I invite you to reflect: what other truths, what other sacred wisdoms might still be hidden in the corners of the world we've overlooked? How many perspectives, lost, dismissed, or ignored, could reshape our understanding of history, faith, and the human story? If you found this exploration meaningful, leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe. There's so much more hidden knowledge and ancient wisdom still waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for joining me on this unforgettable journey into one of Christianity's oldest and most mysterious traditions.